The first thing you should know about the night everything changed is that I almost called in sick. My shoulders had been screaming since the lunch shift at Betty's Griddle, and my feet had gone past aching into a kind of numb that scared me more than pain did. And I still said yes when Cassian's called for an extra body on the floor. 2 jobs. 1 rent. A sister 3 states away whose kidneys had started failing on a Tuesday and never stopped. I did not have the luxury of a night off. I had a uniform, a smile I could put on like a coat, and a name tag that read Wren in letters small enough that most people never bothered to read it at all. Table 9 wants their wine chilled colder, the floor manager said, not looking at me, the way he never looked at me. And smile. You look like you're at a funeral. I smiled. It cost nothing. It also bought nothing. Not the rent, not Josie's dialysis, not the 2 years of paramedic school I had walked out of the year our mother died and never walked back into. I still remembered the ratios, though, still counted breaths without meaning to when someone across the room coughed wrong. An old woman at table 4 had gone gray around the mouth 20 minutes earlier, and I'd quietly rerouted her water glass and told the hostess to seat her nearer the door, just in case, and nobody had asked me how I knew what a stroke looked like before it happened. Nobody ever asked the invisible girl how she knew things. Table 9 was the reason the whole restaurant had gone taut and careful, waiters moving like they were carrying nitroglycerin instead of bread baskets. I hadn't seen her come in. I felt it instead, the way a room changes pressure before a storm, conversations dropping to murmurs, the maitre bowing from the neck instead of the waist. Dahlia Voss, even people who had never set foot near Rourke Street, knew that name, knew the epithet the papers had hung on her the year her wife died, and never taken back down. The Winter Widow. She sat with a boy small enough to still need a booster seat, though nobody at that table would have dared say so to his face. He was maybe 6, dark-haired, imperious as a tiny king, informing his mother in a carrying voice that the breadsticks at this restaurant were, and I quote, unacceptable. Noted, Dahlia Voss said, and did not smile, and somehow the word came out warmer than most people's smiles did. I did not serve their table. I was 3 sections over, refilling water, delivering a check to a couple arguing in low, furious whispers about a lawsuit. When the old woman at table 4 made the sound I'd been dreading all night, a wet, catching gasp, and I was already moving before I decided to move. I got her sideways, got her airway clear, told the hostess the words ambulance and stroke and time of onset in a voice that didn't shake even though my hands wanted to. It took 90 seconds. The manager found me afterward and told me, in front of 3 tables, that customers didn't come to Cassian's to watch the help play doctor. I opened my mouth to explain. I closed it again. Explaining had never once worked in my favor. That was when the window went white. Not white. I understood a half-second later, in the specific white-black flash memory keeps of true emergencies, that it wasn't the window turning any color at all. It was the window becoming 1,000 pieces of itself at once, all of them catching the chandelier light on the way toward table 9, where a 6-year-old boy had just stood up out of his booster seat to point at something outside, directly into the path of it. I did not decide to run toward the gunfire. My body had already made that decision for both of us. I hit him at the knees the way I'd been trained to hit a person out of a road, wrapped both arms around a boy I had never met, and put my back to the window as the whole of it came down. Glass does not sound like anything in movies. It sounds like rain, if rain were made of teeth. I felt it land. Felt the specific separate stings of a dozen small wounds, and one large one blooming hot along my shoulder blade, and underneath me, Milo Voss was screaming his mother's name, and I was saying, muffled against his hair, "It's okay. I've got you. Stay down. Stay down," in the same voice I used to use talking Josie through her worst nights, and none of it felt like heroism. It felt like the only thing my hands knew how to do. Someone was shouting for the shooter, for security, for a doctor. Chairs went over. A second shot cracked somewhere outside, and then nothing, running footsteps receding into the dark. I registered all of it from a great, ringing distance, the way you register weather from inside a house. What I registered up close, what I would remember for the rest of my life in perfect, useless detail, was the woman kneeling in front of me a half-second later, glass crunching under her knees, her hands closing around her son's face first, cataloging him, and only then coming to me. "Look at me," she said. Not a request. Nothing about Dahlia Voss was ever a request. I looked at her. Up close, her eyes weren't the flat black the papers described. They were a very dark, very focused brown, and right now they were doing something I did not expect from a woman with her reputation. They were afraid. "You're bleeding," she said. "I know," I said, and heard how strange my own voice sounded. Thin and very calm. Left shoulder blade, probably 8-10 centimeters. Deep, I need pressure, not panic. Somebody's belt. Now, for one full second, the most feared woman in the city simply stared at me. Then she stripped off her own jacket without being asked twice, balled it, and pressed it hard enough against my back that I heard myself make a sound I was too proud to make in front of strangers. Her other hand found the boy's dark hair and held on like an anchor. "Marcus," she said, without turning her head, in a voice that carried through chaos like a struck bell, "get a car. Not an ambulance. My car." Now, Dahlia, a man's voice started, somewhere behind her, and stopped, because she had already turned that focused brown gaze back to me, and it stayed there, and did not look away again. Not once. All the way to the car. All the way to a private hospital wing I did not know the name of a building could have. All the way to the moment the anesthesiologist put a mask over my face, and the last thing I saw was her still standing at the foot of the bed, with her son's blood-flecked hand held tight in hers and mine, refusing, for reasons I did not understand yet, to let go of either one of us. I woke up smelling black cardamom and cold rain on stone, and it took me a full minute of staring at an unfamiliar ceiling to understand that the smell was a person, and the person had not left the chair beside my bed. "You're awake," Dahlia Voss said. 2 words. She made even those sound like a decision she'd made about me rather than an observation. "Where's Milo?" I asked, because that was the only thing my body had bothered to hold on to through the anesthesia. Something in her face moved, small and fast, gone before I could name it. "Asleep, down the hall. Unhurt," a pause. "Because of you." I tried to sit up and discovered 11 stitches and a very firm hand on my sternum stopping me before I'd gotten 3 inches. "You don't need to do that. I'll decide what I need to do," she said, but she took her hand back anyway, and I noticed, in the particular noticing way you do when you've spent a life being unnoticed yourself, that her jaw was tight the way a person's jaw goes tight when they are holding something down by force. "You have 3 broken ribs from the impact and 41 stitches across your left shoulder blade," she said. "The surgeon says you knew exactly what to tell them before you passed out. Pressure point. Angle of the wound. You gave a trauma report in the middle of being shot at." "I used to train for it," I said. "It came out smaller than I meant it to, a long time ago. Used to." Things happened. I looked at the ceiling instead of at her, because it was easier. My sister got sick. The training doesn't pay the bills when somebody else's does. She was quiet long enough that I thought the conversation had ended the way conversations with important people usually ended with me, a polite closing of a door. Instead, she said, "What's your sister's name?" "Josie." "What's she sick with?" "Lupus nephritis. She's on dialysis 3 times a week in a state I can't afford to visit." I don't know why I told her that. I think it was the smell of her, dark and cold and steady, that made a person want to be honest even against their own better judgment. Dahlia Voss looked at me for a long moment, the kind of look that felt like being weighed on a scale I couldn't see the numbers of. Then she stood, straightened her cuffs, and said, "You will not be going back to that restaurant, or to whatever second job is putting circles under your eyes like that. You will not be going back to worrying about your sister's dialysis center either, as of this morning." "I don't," I started. "You put your body between a bullet and my son," she said, and for the first time her voice cracked open just enough to show what was underneath it. Something raw and old and furious, "and you are going to lie there and tell me you don't need help." "I don't need charity," I said. "I've had enough of people deciding what I need." Something that was almost a smile touched the corner of her mouth. "Good," she said, "because I wasn't offering charity. I was offering a job. Yours, if you want it. My household needs someone who does not flinch when the room goes wrong. You are the only person in 11 years who has run toward my son instead of away from him." I should have said no. I understood, even through the fog of blood loss and anesthesia, that no was the safe answer, the sane answer, the answer that kept a poor Omega girl from getting tangled in the private war of a woman the newspapers called a widow, the way other papers called men murderers. "Okay," I said instead. She held out her hand. I looked at it, then at her, then took it, and felt something pass between our palms that had nothing to do with the deal we'd just made, and everything to do with a scent that had gone, in the space of that handshake, from cold rain on stone to something warmer underneath it, banked coals instead of frost, and I understood dimly, from a great distance, that I had just crossed a threshold I would not be walking back out of. The house on Belmere Hill did not look like a Mafia queen's house from the outside. It looked like old money pretending very hard not to be new violence. Stone the color of wet slate. Windows taller than I was. A housekeeper named Nora, who took one look at the careful way I was holding my stitched shoulder and put me in a kitchen chair and fed me before she asked a single question about who I was. "She doesn't bring people home," Nora said, setting down a bowl of something that smelled like my childhood, though I couldn't have said which part of it. "Not since Elena." "Elena," I repeated. Nora's face did something complicated. "Milo's other mother." "You'll hear the name eventually. Better you hear it from someone who loved her than from someone in this house who's still angry she's gone." I didn't ask more. I had learned a long time ago that grief you're handed too early gets dropped, and I didn't want to drop this one on the kitchen floor of a house I'd been in for 4 hours. The wealth of the place declared itself in textures, not colors. The thread count of the sheets in the guest room I was given, a room bigger than the apartment Josie and I had shared as children. The particular hush of floors that had never needed to creak to announce someone's presence, because whoever built the house had money enough to buy silence too. A security detail that moved like weather, present everywhere and visible nowhere, until Marcus Doyle planted himself in the kitchen doorway on my second morning and looked at me like I was a stain he hadn't been given permission to scrub out yet. "You understand what you walked into," he said, not a greeting. "I understand I got shot at protecting a 6-year-old, I said. "Beyond that, I'm learning. People who get close to her get used against her." He said it flatly, the way you'd state a fact about weather. Elena did. "Now you. I've buried men for less than what you did on Tuesday. I didn't ask to be a target." "No," he agreed. "You asked to catch glass for her kid. which is worse from where I stand because it means you'll do it again. He wasn't wrong. That was the part that kept me up that first week, staring at unfamiliar ceilings, my shoulder aching under fresh dressings. I would do it again. I had already decided, somewhere in the space of 90 seconds and a shattering window, that I would keep doing it, for a boy I'd known less than a day, and a woman whose name I'd only ever read in newspapers. Milo found me on the third morning, sitting cross-legged on the guest room floor in pajamas, patterned with tiny cartoon wolves, studying me with the frank, unblinking assessment only children and very old people are capable of. "You're the glass lady," he informed me. "I have a name," I said. "It's Ren." "I know. Mom told me. But you got glass in you for me, so you're the glass lady now. That's just how it works." He said this with the flat certainty of a boy who had never once had a decision of his overruled by logic. "Do you want to see my rock collection?" Marcus says most of them are just parking lot gravel, but I don't believe him. I did want to see his rock collection. I spent 45 minutes that morning being solemnly informed about the difference between quartz and regular boring rock, and somewhere in the middle of it I laughed, a real laugh, the first one in longer than I wanted to admit, and looked up to find Dahlia Voss standing in the doorway watching us with an expression I did not have a name for yet, something unguarded that she smoothed over the second she caught me seeing it. "He doesn't usually let people near the rocks," she said. "I'm honored. You should be. Marcus has been trying for a year." A pause, her eyes moving over the loose fall of my hair, the borrowed sweater Nora had put me in, cataloging me the way she'd cataloged her son in the restaurant, checking for damage. "How's the shoulder?" "Better. Itching, which the surgeon says is good." "Good." She lingered in the doorway a beat too long for a woman who never lingered anywhere, and then said, almost like it cost her something, "Thank you." "For the rocks." He hasn't laughed like that since. She stopped herself. "Since Elena," I said quietly, because Nora had given me the name, and I thought maybe it needed to be said by someone who wasn't afraid of the wound in it. Dahlia's jaw did the tight thing again. "Since Elena," she agreed, and left before either of us had to decide what to do with that. That night, I found her on the back terrace, alone, a glass of something amber untouched at her elbow, staring out at a garden going dark under a sky the color of a bruise healing. I almost turned around. Instead, I sat down 2 feet away, close enough to matter, far enough to be polite, and said nothing, because some silences are meant to be joined, not filled. "She died in a parking garage," Dahlia said, eventually, without looking at me. 3 blocks from here. A car that wasn't supposed to be there. A bullet that wasn't supposed to be for her. Her hands were very still around the glass. I have run this territory for 11 years without flinching once, and I could not save the one person who mattered enough to make flinching worth it. "That's not a failure of strength," I said. "That's just what love costs. You don't get to keep people safe just because you love them hard enough. Nobody does." She turned to look at me then, and the porch light caught something wet and furious in her eyes that she blinked away before it could fall. "My mother built this family on the doctrine that love is the hole in the armor, that the day you let someone matter is the day you hand your enemies a target." A short, humorless breath. I believed her for 11 years. And then a waitress with 41 stitches in her back told me she didn't need my charity, and I have not been able to stop thinking about her since. I didn't know what to say to that, so I said the truest thing I had. "I'm not a hole in your armor." I'm not asking to be protected. I'm asking to matter on my own, not as a weakness you have to manage. "I know," she said, low. "That's the problem." We sat in the dark a while longer, her scent, cardamom and cold stone, warming by degrees the longer we sat. until it smelled almost like something you could stand close to a fire and call home. When I finally stood to go inside, her hand caught mine, just for a second, thumb brushing once across my knuckles. Careful, testing, a question she didn't ask out loud. I didn't pull away. That, I understood, was its own kind of answer. The accusation came 11 days later, in the middle of a dinner I hadn't been invited to, but had been seated at anyway, because apparently that was simply how things worked in this house now. Camille Reyes arrived the way certain women always arrive, 10 minutes late and utterly unhurried, in a dress the color of good red wine, and a smile that had been sharpened for decades. I knew the name before Nora murmured it to me in the hall. Everyone on Rourke Street knew the Reyes name, the way you know the name of a storm that already took your roof once. "Dahlia," she said, taking the seat across from her like she owned it, "you're looking well, for a woman who just survived an assassination attempt on her heir." Her eyes slid to me, unhurried, assessing, the way you'd price a piece of furniture you weren't sure belonged in the room. "And this must be the little waitress everyone's whispering about." "Ren," I said, "how brave." Camille's smile didn't move, diving in front of glass for a boy she'd met an hour earlier. Almost too convenient, wouldn't you say, Dahlia? A stranger, suddenly indispensable, suddenly in your home, suddenly closer to your son than anyone's gotten in years. The table went very quiet. "Say what you mean," Dahlia said. "Flat, dangerous, I mean," Camille said, setting down her wine glass with exquisite care, "that the shooter who put a bullet through your window has never been found. That someone on the inside had to know your reservation, your table, your son's habit of standing up when he's excited. That it's remarkable how quickly this girl became necessary to you the moment the smoke cleared." She looked at me, and her voice went soft, almost kind, the way a knife can be soft right before it isn't. "Tell me, Ren, was it your idea, or did someone pay you to be in the right place at the right time?" I felt the blood leave my face. I didn't. "She has 41 stitches from a wound she didn't have to take," Dahlia said, before I could finish, her voice a blade laid flat against Camille's throat. "She has a sister on dialysis 3 states away that she has never once mentioned to anyone who could use it against her. And she has been in this house 11 days, under watch, without incident, while you, Camille, have spent 11 years circling territory that used to belong to your family before my mother took it from yours." Her eyes did not blink. "Careful whose loyalty you question at my table." Camille's smile thinned but did not break. "I only ask the questions everyone else is too polite to ask." She rose, unhurried, smoothing her dress. "Do be careful, Dahlia. Grief made you soft once already. It cost you Elena. I'd hate to see what it costs you next." She left without waiting to be shown out. The room exhaled all at once, and I found I'd been holding my knife so tightly the metal had left a mark across my palm. "She's not wrong to be suspicious," I said quietly, once the door had closed. I would be. "She's not suspicious," Dahlia said. "She's afraid. My mother took half her family's territory 40 years ago, and Camille has spent every year since trying to take it back one insult at a time." She reached across the table, not quite touching me, hand hovering an inch from mine. "But I want you to hear this clearly. I do not doubt you. Not for 1 second. Not since the moment you put your back to that window. You should," I said. "You barely know me." "I know you well enough," she said, and this time her hand did close over mine, warm, deliberate, hers. I know the sound of someone telling the truth with a bullet still in the room. I have built an empire on knowing that sound. Do not tell me I don't know you. I should have pulled away. I did not. It was 3 nights after that when the house went dark all at once, all 60 windows losing power in the same half-second, and I woke to Milo's small hand shaking my shoulder and his voice, for once, not imperious at all, just afraid, saying the men outside had cut something, and I need to find my mom. And I didn't know where else to go. I found Dahlia in the security room with Marcus, the two of them staring at a wall of dead screens, her whole body coiled tight as a drawn wire. "Perimeter's down," Marcus was saying. "Somebody spent money to know exactly which lines to cut." "Camille," Dahlia said, and it wasn't a question. That was when the backup generators kicked in, throwing everything into a low emergency red. And in that red light, I watched Dahlia Voss turn and find her son's face and go. For one unguarded second, entirely undone with fear, before she folded it back into something the room could survive looking at. "Get him to the panic room," she said to me, already moving, already reaching for a gun I hadn't known she kept under the desk. "Both of you. Now, I have to go find out what she wants this time." "I'm not leaving you," I said. "You are not a soldier, Ren. No," I said. "I'm the woman who already caught glass for your son once. Let me help you keep him safe instead of arguing with me about it." Something in her face broke open, just for a second, raw and unguarded, and she crossed the space between us and kissed me, hard and brief and furious, like a promise she didn't have time to say out loud, before she pulled back and pressed her forehead once to mine. "Tell me to stop," she said, "and I will. Any of it. All of it. Say the word, and I never touch you again." "Don't stop," I said. "Just come back." She went. I took Milo's hand and ran. The panic room smelled like cedar and steel and the particular metallic fear sweat of a child trying very hard not to cry. I got Milo settled on the narrow bench, wrapped a blanket around his shoulders, and pressed 2 fingers gently to the inside of his wrist without him noticing, counting. The way I'd counted the old woman's pulse at table 4 a lifetime ago. Because some habits are just love with the fear filed off. "Is Mom going to die?" he asked in the flat, terrified voice children use when they've decided the truth is less frightening than being lied to. "No," I said, and made myself sound sure, because that was the only gift I had to give him in that moment. "Your mom has survived worse than tonight. I promise you that. You don't know that. I know her," I said and understood, saying it, that it had become true sometime in the last 2 weeks without my noticing. "I know the sound of someone telling the truth. She's coming back." We sat in the dark for 40 minutes that felt like 4 hours, Milo's hand gone tight and small in mine, before the door finally opened and Dahlia stood there, blood on her sleeve that wasn't hers, exhaustion carved into every line of her, and Milo launched himself off the bench and into her arms with a sound that broke something loose in my chest. "They're gone," she said, over the top of her son's head, her eyes finding mine and staying there. "For tonight." "And Camille?" "Vanished before we got close." Her jaw tightened. "This isn't over." She was right, it wasn't. The wound tending came later that night, after Milo had finally fallen asleep between us on the enormous bed in Dahlia's room, because none of us had been willing to be in separate rooms after the dark had come. I found the old scar along her ribs by accident, my hand resting there while she slept fitfully, and felt her wake beneath my palm. "Elena," she said quietly, before I could ask, the same night. I got there 30 seconds too late to save her, and just in time to take a bullet meant for me instead of her, which felt, for a long time, like the universe telling me exactly whose life it thought was worth more. That's not what it means. I know that now. Her hand found mine over the scar, held it there. It took me 11 years and one waitress with a trauma kit for a spine to understand that surviving isn't a verdict on who deserved to live. It's just what happened. I built a doctrine out of my own guilt and called it strength, and it kept me safe and it kept me alone, and I did not know how much I hated being alone until you sat down next to me on that terrace and didn't ask me to be anything other than what I was. For what it's worth, I said, I think Elena would want you to stop punishing yourself for surviving her. I think you're right. Her thumb moved once, slow, across my knuckles. I think I'm in love with you, and I think it terrifies me more than Camille Reyes ever has. Good, I said, echoing, without meaning to, the word she'd used the day she offered me a job in a hospital room. Because I'm not going anywhere. The warmth of that lasted exactly 6 days. It ended on a Thursday, with Milo's booster seat empty at the breakfast table and a note on Dahlia's desk, in handwriting too elegant to belong to anyone but Camille Reyes, informing her that the boy was safe for now, that the price of his safety was the territory her mother had stolen 40 years ago, and that the waitress should have stayed in her diner where she belonged. I have never in my life seen a room go as cold as the one Dahlia stood in when she read that note. She has my son, she said, and her voice did not shake, which frightened me more than shaking would have. She has taken the only piece of this family my mother's doctrine never touched, and she is going to learn exactly what it costs to reach for him. Dahlia, don't, she said, turning on me, and for the first time since the restaurant her eyes held nothing warm in them at all, only the flat, cold calculation of a woman who had spent 11 years building an empire out of exactly this kind of grief. Don't tell me to be careful. I was careful for 11 years and it cost me a wife. I am done being careful. I'm not telling you to be careful, I said. I'm telling you to let me help you get him back alive, instead of getting him back as a body, which is what happens if you walk in there as a weapon instead of as his mother. That landed. I watched it land, watched something in her face crack open just enough to let the fear back in underneath the fury. Where, she said. Tell me where, and I will bring him home. I didn't know where, not yet, but I knew, from 11 days of watching Marcus's men move through this house, that Camille Reyes had a fondness for the theatrical, a woman who liked her victories witnessed. And I knew, from 2 years of paramedic training that had never quite left my hands even when I'd left the job behind, exactly what kind of place you'd choose to hold a hostage safely, defensibly, close enough to watch and far enough to escape. The old Reyes shipping warehouse on the river, I said. Marcus mentioned it once, said it's been empty since the family lost half its territory. It's got one road in, one road out, and a basement that used to be a cold storage unit. If I wanted somewhere I could control, with an exit and enough privacy to make a point, that's where I'd go. Marcus, in the doorway, went very still. How do you know that? Because I spent 2 years training to think about rooms the way emergency workers think about them, I said. Entrances, exits, sight lines. It's the only class I ever finished. I looked at Dahlia. Let me come. I can read a wound faster than anyone in this house, and if this goes wrong, someone is going to need me before the ambulance does. She looked like she wanted to say no. She said, instead, stay behind me. Every second, we went at midnight, 6 vehicles dark and silent along the river road, and I will not pretend I wasn't afraid, my hands cold around a bag of supplies I'd assembled myself, gauze and a tourniquet, and the 2 working hands the world had spent my whole life underestimating. What I remember most is the warehouse door, rusted and enormous, and the particular silence of a building that knows it is about to become a crime scene. Camille was waiting for us in the cold storage basement, exactly where I'd guessed, Milo seated in a folding chair with his hands zip tied loosely in front of him, more frightened than hurt, and I felt something in me go very calm and very sharp the way it had the night of the shattering window. "You brought the waitress," Camille said, delighted, cruel, how sentimental. "Let him go," Dahlia said. "This is between us. It always was." "It was never between us," Camille said, and her voice cracked for the first time, something old and furious surfacing under the poise. "It was between your mother and mine, 40 years ago, and I have spent my whole life inheriting a war I never chose, the same way your son is about to inherit one. Unless you finally understand what it costs to lose everything to your family." "I understand exactly what it costs," Dahlia said. "Lo, I buried my wife because of it." "Then you understand why I won't stop," Camille said, and reached for the gun at her hip. What happened next took 4 seconds, though it felt, in the way true emergencies always do, like it took considerably longer. Dahlia moved between the gun and her son. I moved toward Milo. Marcus's men came through the side door Camille hadn't accounted for, because I had told them, 20 minutes earlier, exactly where the warehouse's second exit would be, the one every cold storage basement built after 1970 was legally required to have. The shot that came was wild, panicked, and it caught Dahlia along the outside of her arm instead of anywhere it could have killed her, and I understood, watching her stagger and not fall, that she had put her body between that bullet and her son exactly the way I had put mine between the glass and him 3 weeks earlier, and something about the symmetry of it broke and mended my heart in the same instant. "Drop it," Marcus said, gun leveled, voice iron. Camille's own men were already backing away, hands raised, unwilling to die for a war that had never been theirs to fight. Camille looked at the gun still in her hand, at the son she'd threatened now sobbing with relief in his mother's good arm, at the waitress kneeling in front of the woman she'd spent a lifetime resenting, already tearing gauze with her teeth to press against a wound that wasn't fatal but was bleeding badly. Something in her face went, for one unguarded second, unbearably tired. "Finish it," she said quietly to Dahlia. "You've earned the right." Dahlia's hand, blood-slicked, tightened on Marcus's gun where she'd taken it from him. I watched her aim it, watched 11 years of grief and fury gather behind her eyes, and I put my hand over hers, not stopping her, just there, warm against the cold. "Don't," I said. "Not in front of him." She looked at Milo, small and shaking and watching his mother with the kind of unguarded fear no child should ever have to wear. Something in Dahlia's face gave way. She lowered the gun. "Take her," she said to Marcus. "Alive, the council will decide what happens to a woman who kidnaps children and shoots mothers in front of them. That verdict isn't mine to make with a bullet. It was mercy. It cost her everything she had left that night to give it. I have never respected anyone more than I respected her in that basement, blood soaking through gauze I was pressing to her arm, choosing, with her son sobbing against her hip, to be better than the doctrine she'd been raised on." The council convened 8 days later, in a room I was not technically permitted to enter and entered anyway, because Dahlia Voss had informed the assembled heads of 6 families that anyone objecting to my presence could take the matter up with her personally. Camille Reyes stood in the center of that room in handcuffs, and Marcus laid out, piece by piece, the evidence I had helped him assemble in the days since the warehouse, recorded confessions, financial transfers routing straight from Reyes' accounts to the man who'd fired through Cassian's window, phone records placing Camille 3 blocks from the restaurant the night of the shooting. My 2 unfinished years of training had taught me how to read a chart of vitals under pressure. It turned out the same steady hands were good for reading a chart of evidence, too. "You will lose everything your family has left," the council's eldest voice pronounced, and I watched Camille's face go, for the first time since I'd met her, entirely without armor. "Exile, every asset seized. You will not set foot in this city again." She didn't fight it. I think some part of her had wanted, for 40 years, to finally lose the war her mother had handed her. Dahlia found me afterward on the courthouse steps, her arms still in a sling, Milo's hand tucked into hers, and in front of the reporters who had gathered to catch a glimpse of the Winter Widow's verdict, she did something the papers would talk about for a year afterward. She knelt, on marble steps, in front of everyone, and took my hand. "I have run an empire for 11 years without needing anyone's permission for anything," she said, loud enough for the cameras, for the council, for every sneering face that had ever looked through me like I was furniture. "I am asking for yours now. Ren Calloway. Marry me. Bond with me. Let the whole city know exactly whose you are, because I already know exactly whose I am." "Tell me to stop, and I will," I said, echoing her own words back to her through tears I didn't bother hiding, "if you're only asking because of the cameras." "I'm asking," she said, "because I have loved you since you told me you didn't need my charity, and every day since has only made that truer." "Then don't stop," I said, and kissed her on courthouse steps in front of the entire city that had never once bothered to learn my name, and felt, for the first time in my life, completely and permanently seen. 6 months later, the estate on Belmere Hill smelled like honeysuckle instead of gun oil, and I had gotten used to the particular hush of floors that no longer felt like they belonged to someone else's life. The wedding was small, by the standards of a family that measured everything in territory and headcount. Nora cried through the entire ceremony and denied it afterward. Marcus gave a toast so gruff and so short that it took the room a full 10 seconds to realize he'd said, in 15 years working for that family, he had never once seen Dahlia wait for another person the way she'd waited, patient and terrified, for me to decide I was ready. Sam, who used to slip me free pie at the diner and had once worked up the courage to ask me to a movie I never had time to see, raised his glass with a grin that held no bitterness in it at all and told me some stories just aren't yours to be the hero of, and I'm glad this one is. The bond happened the night of the wedding, in the quiet after the guests had gone, Dahlia's mouth at my throat asking one more time, one final consent gate before the mark that would tie us together for good. "Tell me to stop," she murmured against my scent gland, "and I will." "Don't stop," I said, and she didn't, and the bite that followed hurt for exactly as long as it took to become the warmest thing I had ever felt, her scent and mine tangling into something new. Cold stone gone warm, wild honey gone rich, a single signature where two used to be. Milo, 3 weeks after the wedding, informed us both very seriously over breakfast that he had decided he wanted a sister and that he had already picked the name, and no, he would not be taking suggestions. Dahlia laughed so hard she had to set down her coffee, and I understood, watching her, that this was the sound Elena must have loved once, and that loving Dahlia now didn't erase that history, it simply made room for it, the way a house can hold more than one kind of warmth at once. Josie moved into the guest cottage that spring, her treatment fully funded, her color returning by degrees. I tracked the way I used to track vitals, out of love instead of fear, now. I finished my paramedic certification that same year, walking back into the classroom I'd walked out of a decade earlier, and Dahlia sat in the back row of my graduation in a suit that cost more than the building, crying without any apparent shame at all. We went to the ocean in September, the 4 of us, because I had mentioned once, half asleep on a terrace months before any of this had a name, that I'd never seen it, and Dahlia Voss did not forget things that mattered to the people she loved. She had a jeweler reset the cracked glass robin from my mother's old bracelet in a thin band of silver before we left. The same little bird that had shattered against a window the night everything changed, made whole again, and worn now on my wrist instead of hidden in a pocket. On the last morning of that trip, I woke before Dahlia did, the way I still sometimes did out of old habit, and found the light coming low and gold through the cottage window, catching the little silver-set glass bird on my wrist and throwing one small, bright piece of color across the wall. Milo was asleep in the next room. Dahlia's arm was heavy and warm across my waist, her breath even against my shoulder blade, directly over the scar that had started all of it. I used to believe that being overlooked was simply the shape of my life, a debt owed for being poor, for being ordinary, for being the girl nobody thought to look at twice. I understand now that being seen was never about being extraordinary. It was about someone finally being willing to look, and to keep looking, even when it cost them everything they had left. The ones who see you when it costs them nothing don't count. Watch, always, for the ones who see you when it costs them everything. The end.